So this is the Chosen Scoop. My name is Corbett Manders with Chosen Payments, and we have here one of our clients, Kira Wizner with Merritt Bookstore. Thank you for being with us.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, all things considered, it's been okay. Which is one of the things that we sort of want to jump right into is, you know, you being in New York, Millbrook, if I'm right, correct?
Yeah.
It's not too far from, you know, one of the major epicenters of, you know, coronavirus and such. But I guess, you know, sort of jump right in there. I have some other questions I want to talk to you about, you know, about how you got started in the business and such. But I mean, like from a retail perspective, I mean, what have you had to change from just normal business life?
I mean, it's been kind of amazing. So in the middle of March, when it's usually really quiet here, all of a sudden, everybody who has a house here, who lives in the city, we're about 90 miles north of Manhattan here. So everybody who had a house here, everybody who had a friend who had a house here, or anybody who kind of had access to like somebody's like guest house or something like that, like all those people descended upon Millbrook in a really positive way. Like people who, you know, sometimes I only see, you know, in the summer, you know, got here. Anybody who was going away, like it was right when school vacations were starting. Everybody had kind of sort of plans, I think, to take off. So a lot of people just wound up just relocating here, thinking it was going to be, what, a week, 2 weeks or something like that. And so while we had the store open that first weekend, we very quickly realized once that the governor, you know, announced like non-essential businesses were closed, that we had to figure out like what to do with all the stuff in the store. But really, most importantly, they closed schools and they closed libraries. And so all of a sudden you have people with a lot of time on their hands without access to physical, you know, learning materials or books or anything like to play games and puzzles and things like that that we, you know, had right here.
So I know that when when the closure started happening, Amazon, which is obviously a big competitor, probably, you know, the biggest one that has, you know, hurt independent bookstores for the last how many number of years. When it first started, they considered books non-essential, and so they stopped sending it, you know, overnight, you know, the 2-day shipping. I mean, has that, you know, is that benefited, would you say, your store at all, or, you know, the industry?
I mean, it probably in this situation benefited us more than it would have, because I guess, right, when you have something delivered to your door during a pandemic, even though you have to deal with like whatever the contamination of the box is, it's probably safer than, let's say, leaving your house. So in one sense, that really could have been an answer for a lot of people for things. And then it wasn't for books. And that made it very easy for me to remind people that we could do contactless pickup. Like we, you know, we invented all these words. You know, I don't know who said it first, but you know, some people were calling it curbside, but I was calling it porch because we have a porch. And so we really tried to let people know right away that we could both get them what they needed. We certainly considered it essential, which is a luxury. Obviously, it's not, you know, essential, but it's essential once you're eating and you're safe, and that we could get it to them in a way that was as safe as possible.
So did you utilize both, like, you know, the porch curbside and like e-commerce online? Did you do both?
Yeah,
or?
So we were lucky. So we, you know, you're our payment processor, but then our website provider is our point of sale system, and our website is run by this company called Book Manager that has bookstores in Canada, and a lot of the booksellers, you know, use it, but not everybody. And they were already making some changes to their e-commerce site, but we were really not doing that much online sales. Like part of the reasons you get a lot of spam requests for online sales, and that can be really tricky to balance, like what's a real, you know, who's a real customer and who's not, you know. So it would really be people we recognized who might not be here and would want to do something, but we were barely using our online capability, also because shipping is so expensive. And so then two things kind of happened at the same time. One, obviously we had this need to keep track of things, and there's only so many phone and FaceTime orders I could do. And the first actually week that we started, it was actually just me here alone. Like New York had this sole proprietor where you could be in the store by yourself. But I was really the only one available that first week. And so I was trying to keep it all together and keep it organized. So the e-commerce part of our site made that much easier, but it was a bit of a learning curve for people to figure out how to do it. And then I would say about three weeks into it, we realized that our shipping capabilities with one of the other shipping distributors was something that we weren't taking full advantage of the rates they were offering us because we really didn't understand what it was and how to do it, which now seems silly. And so once I kind of figured that out, that made it much easier to offer people, definitely to pay for shipping. There's no way our margins are too small to, Amazon doesn't make money shipping books for free. They lose, I think, actually, but they make money then when you come back and buy a stereo. So once we kind of figured out how to do that, that made it a little bit easier. And then also the people who work on the website, they were tweaking things behind the scenes and improving things. And so literally that whole system is shifted in an amazing way. So now we're much more streamlined, even though we definitely are still like making like little mistakes here and there and figuring out processes and how to get things done.
So from your perspective, because we may be dealing with this for, a number of more months. I mean, do you think is going to be the new normal, or do you think it's going to be, a return to normalcy and, however it was beforehand,
so this marks a week that we have had allowed people back in the store. And what we found actually is that we really still have a really lovely balance of people who are ordering online and then coming in to pick up. Some people still want contactless pickup. Some people, we're bringing the bags, putting them on the porch, going back inside, and they're getting them. Some people are starting an online order to make sure that the titles that they want, that they know are set aside, and then coming and picking up, and then can see, other things while they are picking up. And so as I think about myself as a shopper, there is a convenience, right, to online. Like you think of something and you can kind of sort of get it done right away. It's not even like putting it on a list. It's like, remember to buy that book. It's like you actually purchased that book. And I think that I can now understand how it would feel to buy a book at my, my bookstore and then come in on the weekend, or, come in a couple of days later when, people are coming into town for groceries or things like that. Or when you want to walk over when the weather's nicer. So I'm hoping that people will really find that they can use both, and that it may be the new normal, which is really nice. Because you capture those moments like at 11:30 at night when you read, an article, or when you read, I don't know you must know this about the book industry, but people publish lists and reviews and lots of things like that way before books are published sometimes. And so we, you can pre-order on our site and things like that. Which if people didn't know that, then in their head, I think they think pre-order, they've got to go somewhere else that they know of. And it's my job now to continue to remind people that you can pre-order from us, you can order from us online and do that. And then that just becomes part of your experience in the store, as opposed to, or your only experience if that's what you want. But we can provide that experience too.
Yeah, I think this has provided a unique opportunity that, people have been able to re-engage with local businesses. In addition to doing more e-commerce, a lot of stores like Amazon, Walmart, they had huge increases in their e-commerce sites. I think it's allowed a lot of businesses a lot of consumers to re-engage with local businesses. At least that's for us, because, we can't, when we're based in Ventura County, we weren't supposed to leave the county. We're supposed to can't travel city to city. We had to stay just in the city. So that's an interesting concept. But I guess to sort of change gears, to go more about, I guess, in your personal history with the bookstores. I mean, so what made you get started in the business? Book selling.
I had been an English teacher, and then I had my kids and had family, different things to take care of and be around for. And then I found myself, as my kids were getting older, not really being able to go back to teaching. Teaching is a strange schedule for when you have a family in a lot of ways. And my husband's a teacher. And so I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And I poked around with a few different ideas for a lot of times, but it's not so easy to be in your 40s and like start kind of something new, or be hired in something that you might understand about, but that's like filled with, just workers who have only been doing, there was like a Huffington Post like parenting position for a while that I was really excited about, as kind of like I had done like a lot of parent education and things like that. And, it went to someone who was, I think, like 22, and because the previous person had a baby, and like, so we we were renting a house up near the bookstore, and then we bought a house, and then the person who owned the bookstore died. And I knew a little bit about it, and I knew that his widow didn't want to own it anymore, but she wanted to stay. So I kind of had someone who had the institutional knowledge, and yet this opportunity that they were kind of sort of giving me to have a bookstore. And I had been at my daughter's schools doing the book fair for like the past 8 years. So I had this weird understanding of the retail book world and how, you know, slim the margins are, and how, but yet I had it in this really exciting setting of like once a year at school with like all my friends, and, you know, right around holiday times when people were really shopping. So kind of that exciting retail part. And then I guess the way I shop for books, which was always like very aggressively, because that's what I love the most. But so I bought the store, and then, you know, right. It was like not that thing where it was my dream to always own a bookstore. Like it's my dream to just read all the time, which I still do a lot of, and I really make sure to create the time for. But definitely that's like probably the thing that you have the least amount of time for sometimes, because you're in charge of like everything else then.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So I mean, you know, I guess from taking over it, like you said, like it wasn't necessarily your dream. It just sort of, you know, you had the experience, the opportunity came there, and you decided
right. I mean, it became my dream.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and it answered that question. I jokingly, you know, have told the story a million times, but my husband kept saying to me, just pick one thing. And because I was like, I'm interested in everything. Like, and I really am. Like, I was just as interested in like what you do, and like how, like, I really find a lot to be interested in. And he kept saying, just pick one thing. And so now I got to pick one thing, but that encompasses everything.
That's
I feel like, woohoo.
A loophole. You found the loophole in it. So I mean, like, what's the I guess the biggest challenge you have to overcome? You know, the pandemic, all the coronavirus aside. I mean, what's the biggest challenge that I know from being a, you know, bookstore business owner?
I mean, you know, there are so many books. I get catalogs, and they're digital now, and I have sales representatives from all the major publishing firms, and I would say that 4,000 or 5,000 titles, even more, are presented to me each season, and that's probably twice a year. But so now there are a lot of people who are doing summer as a separate season, are presented for me to choose from to decide what I'm going to put in the store. And then I have to deal with everything that's already in the store, and you have to figure out like how long you hold it till it sells, and how many books can you have. And there's a little bit of a formula after you've been doing it for a while. But at the beginning, I kept saying to everybody, like, how do I know how many books to buy? And they're like, you'll figure it out. And like you do, but it's hard. And books that you got excited about, you know, sometimes sit there. And how many do you buy? Like if you buy just one, like how are you putting it out for someone to see it? And if you buy two and then somebody buys one, then it's kind of like one like straggly one. And like any kind of sort of retail research that one does, which I've now done, it's the same thing with like lemons or apples. You know, if you put a whole pile of apples up, you're going to sell the apples and have some left. But if you put like 2 apples out, you know, or like the last 3 lemons, like never get sold. And so that understanding of what you have to buy and what you have to offer and how you have to display it and how long you hold on to it, and then what to buy new, like it is a dance that does not stop.
Sounds like it. So, you know, it's interesting you mentioned that because you were presented with so many books. Like when we first met at the Wizner Institute, they had that room full of all the first editions or the advanced readers editions.
Yeah.
And my wife is a huge reader, huge reader. She goes through books, no problem. So I grabbed a handful, like just what I thought she might be interested in. And it was really interesting because I can't even imagine, like, she would go through books, but like, oh, this was the worst book ever, or like, this was a fantastic book. There's this book called like The Good Wife, and books there, and she read it, and she's like, this was so fantastic. And it's neat because those advanced reader editions, they have like ways you can get in contact with the author, let them know. And I was like, you should email and let her know. Like, it was fantastic. But I can't even imagine from a book owner perspective, like which books to pick.
And a lot of the times the ARCs, those readers' copies come after you've already done your order.
Oh, really?
Not always, but sometimes.
Oh,
and
man.
So then it's like you read something, and if you've ordered it and like you like it, like just this morning, I increased an order of something I had ordered 2. I increased that order to 6. But then there's stuff you read that you've ordered like 6 where you don't necessarily, want it, or you're not going to be able to get excited about it. And that actually from this Corona period, because I was in the store and the customer was not, I started to understand like what are they're called hand sales in the book industry, and I know this, and I've always had them, but I really looked at books that I might never walk over to, and so then I have to ask myself, well, why are those in the store, right? And especially if no one's asking for them. And that was also this idea of trying to understand like what kind of publicity is something going to get. Like, so if something's going to get publicity and someone else is going to tell someone about it, if I haven't read about it, then that's great. But if it's not, if no one's going to tell you about it and you can't browse and look for it, and I haven't read it because it's either like really not my wheelhouse, or I just, didn't get to it because it's book 700, then I'd have to bring in different things. Like to think about the winter, like I'm doing all my fall orders now. And I'm really trying to figure out, like, are they going to close the stores? Will everything be closed again? Am I buying for people who are browsing, or am I buying a little more streamlined? I don't know.
That'll be a challenge. So, I mean, what, now that you've been, how long have you owned the store for? Approximately.
So it was it will be coming on 5 years in November. So it's probably about 4.5.
Okay.
A little more.
So, I mean, now that you've owned the store for 4 to 5 years, I mean, what, besides the fact that you get to read probably plenty, I mean, what do you love about the bookselling industry that maybe you didn't know beforehand?
I mean, I love the chance to connect with other booksellers, to connect with the editors and authors and all the people in publishing. Like, it's a very interesting, it's an interesting world, and everybody's kind of sort of doing similar things, right? Each house has like the kind of books that they're a little bit known for. And then there's some real smaller, imprints out there. And the more you kind of get to know the books you like, and then you start to see the trends, like there is an editor who I really like what she chooses for nonfiction. And that's like not something that I was thinking about that much beforehand. And as a person who used to teach middle school, I'm also really good looking again at like, what are those backlist books that are forever books? And then, what backlist kind of changed, or what becomes the new backlist, right? So like, what are those books that like every year, rise to the top, where I think like, I'm always going to have this book in stock. Like there's a book called Front Desk that came out maybe 2 summers ago now, by a woman named Kelly Yang. And it's her experience coming from China to America, and her parents owned a motel. And that's a book that I'm going to have in my store. Like that there will always be, probably I would say like 2 or 3, copies of that on hand all the time. And that's something new. Whereas I also have something like Jenny and the Cat Club, which is, from the 40s or even 30s, I think, by Esther Averill, which is like an amazing read aloud. Like that's something like I always have. But now those 2 books almost have like a little bit of the same weight in my understanding of like my children's section, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I mean, we're coming from someone that doesn't, knows what he needs to know about like the bookselling industry. I mean, from a book owner perspective, I mean, you talk about inventory is one of the greatest challenges, and part of that why you love it so much is you essentially get to find books that maybe you didn't know about, and books you always get to have and keep on. I mean, inventory wise, I mean, what books do you usually have to keep a ton of that just go out, or are there seasonal? Like, it sounds like you're talking inventory of like 2, 3 books, maybe 6 books. I mean, sounds like they're pretty. You have to be pretty picky about which books you're getting.
You have to be pretty picky, and it's like scary too, because like something happens. I mean, this is like bookseller scared. It's like some people like have lunch on a Friday and come in and buy like, not Catcher in the Rye, let's say, but that would be true. Like, let's say if on a Friday afternoon somebody came in and bought like 2 copies of Catcher in the Rye, like I probably have 2 copies of Catcher in the Rye, but I don't have 3 copies of Catcher in the Rye, which means that I have to imagine like all weekend if someone comes in for Catcher in the Rye, which is the most basic book, like right. If I don't have it. But yet there have been times where I've had 4 copies of Catcher in the Rye and they've sat there. And so you have to really kind of look at it's very risky, know, and it's silly. And if they sit there for long enough, then they, don't look so good. So you really don't want to do that. So But there are books like that, right? Like, so I'm always going to have Catch on the Rye. I'm always going to have, well, I mean, look at just what happened now. Like, I had in my store, I had 4 copies of How to Be an Anti-Racist, which came out in January, I guess, this year, last year. I had 2 or 3 copies of Between the World and Me. I had 20 copies. I think I had 22 copies of White Fragility, which all went. And so I was so grateful, like, to have like those copies of those books. And those were, I would bring them to certain events and I would go to it, but I wanted to have them. I didn't want to not, I didn't want to have one copy sitting there. So right. That's paid off. And of course, like mystery series, you have to be really careful with that. Like always having the first and the last, and like Louise Penny, if I get low on her, I get really nervous because someone inevitably comes in and says like, oh, I just found out my friend didn't read Louise Penny. Like, give me the first 4. And you're like, okay, I can do it.
So, you mentioned like one of the things you love is like connecting with other booksellers and others in the industry. I mean, what advice would you give? Because there's still plenty. There's still like, especially in our business when we're helping a lot of new book, sellers start their business and get the payment processing set up. I mean, what advice would you have for them from what from these years of doing it?
I mean, I'm still taking all the advice from everybody else who's been doing
Never
it.
Stop learning.
I mean, but the people who have started after me, who they've asked me I tell them to be very, just try to buy not as little as possible, but just really try to be selective with what you're buying, and I know everyone always says like, you can always order more. And if you're stuck with it when a customer is not there and you don't have it, you feel so bad, but, to just kind of sort of be really careful. And then really also just to watch the patterns. Like really you need those first couple of years just to establish what those patterns are. And so that's where there is no answer, right, of how many books do I buy when I would ask that question in the beginning. But you start to see like your seasonal patterns, but it also I guess it's just to be like constantly aware and constantly reflective, because now so now you've had people who have been within 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 miles of this bookstore who have never been in, who come up on the weekend and like didn't maybe want to spend time like shopping for books. So they go order books wherever they order them from. And they used, up here as like their place to hang out. And now these people have come in and usually once they're here, they're like, oh my God, it's like so grateful. It's amazing. Like, I love it. It's great. It's pretty. And that's wonderful for me. There's only so much you can tell people that if they're not here themselves. So I think one of the things I've learned is that you just still have to keep connecting with people and getting them in. And so what happens the first year is not necessarily what's going to happen the second year or the third year. And now I could even say even the 5th year, like the fact that I could have now increased my audience by what I did. And I don't know the percentage yet, but I definitely know that I've had, I would say probably 200 new customers since this whole thing started. And if those people come back and buy 1 book a year after this, that's that's a couple months rent maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially for like me locally, because of Mother's Day had happened, and one of the things about why besides books is puzzles. And so it was the first time I got to go to our local bookstore. They just changed management. It's called the Bookworm. First time I got to go, and they had puzzles and everything that we needed to get, and it was curbside. And yeah, I completely agree. And I think we're going to obviously be returning to that store, and I'm sure they'll be the same for all independent bookstores. So I mean, after all we've talked about, and given the outlook of this pandemic and how it's affecting how governors and local ordinances have affected individual business owners, I mean, what do you see in the future? Like, how do you see the industry playing out and your individual store?
I mean, I think there are a couple of things. I think one of those things is that people have realized that still what you're getting from me is a different experience than you're getting when you just shop like kind of sort of anywhere online, right? Because I have like my curated list that, if you trust me or me, and you can always like add, and I can call you or I'll email or something like that. So the experience of coming into the store and the experience of ordering online for the store is still like an intimate, curated, personal experience. And that's where, where I can't discount a book the way somebody else might. The point is that I'm here for that, and like my staff is here and stuff like that. So I think the biggest thing is that no matter what happens with this pandemic, with God forbid something else happening, we exist here now in a way that people know that they can kind of reach us from afar. And so if we close down again to customers, we will still be able to, know how to do this. And also the customers kind of know how to do it from their side. But I think just to nurture that relationship, to remind people, like, because, right, I don't want someone ordering from my bookstore and not going to their local bookstore, right? I want just the people around here to order from me, or these people to send something to their, I've definitely sent presents to, people's relatives, like in other places and stuff like that. But I think it's that constant, like, it's that personal connection to anything, right? So like, I don't want someone, like I've sent books to friends, which has been like the most lovely thing in the whole entire world. And so there's a way, to have customers from afar who have their own local bookstores, but who are going to, throw a couple books my way every once in a while, which I really appreciate. And I think the idea with whatever happens with the changes, people know that we're here and that we can kind of sort of exist through it, let's say. And we've tried to put all these processes into place so we can hand things off if it's just one of us. Like for a while, we were just then tag teaming. So like I was in then for part of the day and my manager was in for part of the day. That might not have totally answered that question, but
no, it is, because I mean, like it's now that you're like reopening that people back in the store, this has been it's been a test run. You know what I mean? You've been able to figure out the processes and everything. If it happens again, if need be, hopefully not. But I think it's about learning to be flexible. Right. Flexible, right?
Well, they talked about at Winter Institute, right? They were talking about that idea of pivoting. And they were talking about pivoting in terms of like what you're carrying and things like that. But I think we've all just learned to like really pivot into this new, what became that new normal for 3 months. I mean, that was 3 months. Yeah. A long time.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, we were sent home. We've just finally, same thing, slowly getting back in, but still, social distancing. And we're finally getting back in the office. And it's a lot of catching up because, like, we had a lot of customers trying to get a hold of us. And, like, we're not a phone company, so our phone system is just not as tip-top as our processing, even though that could also be improved in a lot of ways. And
like, I reached out to you early on in this, and you emailed me back right away and were able to get me the help I needed.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the compliment.
I mean,
it's been, we've all had to learn to be flexible, and I was talking about it with my manager about that, and our VP of sales, and it was a great test run. If something were to happen again, I think we'll be better prepared for it, and still be able to thrive, even in these conditions. But yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting to talk to you about this because, like, I have a lot of bookstore clients, throughout the United States, some with multiple stores, some that are very, very, very small, stores. But it's been nice to get sort of an in-depth look at, like, what it's like to be an actual owner of a bookstore and sort of like managing inventory, the challenges you have to face. I mean, it's good. It's good to get that insider view. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. Is there any other last things that, that sort of jumped out at you that maybe we haven't talked about?
I was thinking about it a second ago. Oh, you said, we were talking about that we've learned to manage. I think this idea of expectations, like what the expectation is, like the expectation that you get a book overnight in like a day or two, like, I think this whole thing has maybe made everybody relax. I hope what their expectations are and how, yes, that could happen, but, but that's kind of an unrealistic expectation. Like the fact that it is and it's not. Like, and sometimes you can get a book overnight from me that I don't have. And if I placed an order, at the I place orders 2 days a week. So if you get me the day I'm placing it, you might get your book the next day. But, what I hope everyone's going to take away from this is this kind of sort of ability just to be a little bit more relaxed and human about it all and realize, that we're in this together. And that means that if everyone's giving, that everyone's going to work really hard to do our best. I mean, at least we do. We are. So So thanks.
It's, if you try, you're just stronger. You know what I mean? If it doesn't kill you, you're stronger. Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate Kira, and I look forward to working with you a lot longer.
Me too. Thanks a lot, Corbett.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.